A homeless girl accidentally found an injured stray dog and took it home to care for it. While she and the dog were performing street circuses to make a living, a millionaire's son suddenly rushed up to them shouting, "Thief!" The city never truly slept. Even in the late hours of the evening, the streets pulsed with movement, cars rolling sluggishly through intersections, people hurrying past in thick coats, their heads down against the biting wind. The sidewalks gleamed under the dim glow of streetlights, littered with scraps of paper that swirled in the cold gusts like restless ghosts. Caroline sat on the curb, knees drawn up to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around her body. The oversized hoodie she wore was stiff from wear, its sleeves frayed, the fabric doing little to shield her from the chill that seeped into her bones. Hunger clawed at her stomach, a dull ache she had long since learned to ignore. She watched as a couple strolled by, laughing softly, their gloved hands intertwined. A hot dog vendor packed up his cart, steam rising in curls from the last of his sizzling sausages. The smell twisted something deep inside her, but she knew better than to ask for leftovers. People weren't generous to street kids, not when they looked like her, dirty, tired, invisible. A sudden burst of laughter rang out behind her. "Hey, look, it's Rat Girl." Caroline stiffened. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The boys had been bothering her for weeks, a pack of restless street kids who roamed the alleys looking for easy targets. She wasn't the only one they tormented, but she was the easiest, small, quiet, alone. "Didn't I tell you guys?" one of them sneered. "She lives in the gutter, probably eats garbage." Another boy kicked at a discarded soda can, sending it clattering against the pavement near her feet. Caroline didn't flinch. She had learned that reactions only made things worse. "Maybe we should give her a bath," one of them suggested, his voice dripping with mock concern. "There's a puddle over there." "Not worth the effort," another muttered. "She'd still stink." The group dissolved into laughter, their voices sharp against the night air. Caroline exhaled slowly, staring at the ground. Let them get bored. Let them move on. A whistle sounded from down the street, and the boys' attention shifted. One of them muttered something about heading to the arcade. Just like that, they lost interest, shoving their hands into their pockets and disappearing around the corner. Caroline released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She pushed herself up, brushing dust from her jeans. It wasn't the worst thing that had happened to her. Just another night. She turned into an alley, its shadows stretching long and thin under the flickering street lamp. The scent of damp concrete and old trash filled the air, but she barely noticed. It was just another familiar corner of the city, one of the many places she drifted between. Then she heard it, a soft, whimpering sound. Caroline hesitated, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. At first, she saw nothing but crumpled newspapers and discarded bottles. Then, beneath a pile of broken cardboard, something shifted. A dog. It was small, curled up tightly, its fur matted and filthy. A beagle, she realized, though its coat was dulled by grime. One of its ears twitched, but it didn't lift its head. She crouched down, careful not to move too quickly. "Hey," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The dog let out another faint whimper. Its body trembled, ribs faintly visible beneath its fur. It looked weak, hurt. Caroline's fingers tightened into fists. She had nothing, no food, no money, barely enough warmth for herself. She should walk away. She didn't. Instead, she shrugged off her hoodie, her arms instantly prickling against the cold. Carefully, she draped it over the dog, tucking the fabric around its fragile body. The animal barely reacted, only shifting slightly as the warmth settled over it. "You're just like me, huh?" she whispered. The dog's eyes flickered open, soft, brown, weary. Caroline swallowed hard. She reached out slowly, brushing her fingers against its fur. It flinched, then stilled. "I'll figure something out," she promised. "We'll figure something out." Carefully, she gathered the small bundle into her arms. The dog was light, too light, its ribs pressing against her forearm. It didn't resist. As she stepped back onto the street, the city remained indifferent, its neon signs flashing, its people moving past without a second glance. But for the first time in a long time, Caroline wasn't alone. The city exhaled in the early hours of dawn, its breath cold and unwelcoming. The towering buildings stood like silent sentinels, their windows reflecting the dull glow of streetlights. The night had stripped away the noise, leaving only the occasional rumble of a distant car and the rustling of discarded newspapers tumbling across the pavement. Caroline sat against the rough brick wall of an abandoned lot, her arms curled protectively around the small body nestled against her. Milo's rhythmic breathing was the only warmth she had. The hoodie she had wrapped around him barely did anything to keep the cold from creeping into her bones, but she didn't care. The dog had stopped shivering, and that was enough. She shifted slightly, wincing as the stiffness in her joints reminded her that sleeping on concrete was never kind. The night had been long, colder than usual, the kind of cold that seeped into your skin, into your ribs, into the spaces between your fingers, making everything feel heavier. Milo stirred, letting out a soft sigh before curling deeper against her side. Caroline pulled the hoodie tighter around them both, resting her chin against her knees. "You're lucky you don't have to think about tomorrow," she murmured, her breath clouding in the crisp air. "It's just food, warmth, and the next step. That's it." The dog didn't answer, of course, but something about the slow rise and fall of his tiny chest made her feel like he understood. The city was waking up now. The distant hum of traffic grew louder, and somewhere down the street, the clatter of a metal shutter being pulled open signaled the start of another morning. Caroline sighed and stretched her legs out, careful not to disturb Milo. She needed to find food. The bakery was already busy by the time she reached the small alley beside it. The smell of fresh bread lingered in the air, thick and warm, making her stomach clench painfully. She waited, counting the minutes, watching as people stepped in and out, their hands full of steaming pastries. She knew better than to beg outright. People didn't like dirty kids hovering near their businesses, reminding them of things they didn't want to see. Taking a slow breath, she edged closer to the trash bin near the side entrance. Sometimes, if she was lucky, they tossed out bread that wasn't quite fresh enough for customers, but still good enough to eat. Just as she reached out, a sharp voice cut through the morning air. "Hey, get lost!" Caroline barely had time to react before the bakery worker, an older woman with deep frown lines, stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. She waved a metal tray in Caroline's direction, eyes narrowed. "I told you before, no loitering." Caroline took a step back, lifting her hands slightly in surrender. She wasn't about to argue, not when she already knew how this went. "Wasn't doing anything," she muttered. The woman scoffed. "Yeah, sure, move along." Caroline turned on her heel, trying to ignore the hollow ache in her stomach. But as she walked away, she caught sight of something from the corner of her eye. An old man sitting on a wooden crate near the alley, his coat frayed at the edges. He met her gaze for only a second before glancing down at the bin. Her eyes followed his. A small bundle of bread wrapped in a napkin, placed just beside the trash but untouched. She hesitated. The man didn't say anything, just gave her a slight nod before lighting a cigarette with hands that shook slightly from the cold. Caroline didn't need more encouragement. She walked past, slow and deliberate, and when she turned the corner, the bread was in her pocket. Milo wagged his tail as she knelt beside him in the alley, breaking the bread into small pieces. She set the larger half in front of him. "Go on, she murmured, watching as he sniffed it before taking a careful bite. She chewed her own piece slowly, savoring it, letting the warmth spread across her tongue. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. By afternoon, she had made her way to a quieter part of the city, a stretch of old buildings with alleyways where she could sit unnoticed. She barely had time to settle before the familiar voices reached her ears. Well, look who it is. Caroline tensed. The group of boys stood at the mouth of the alley, their expressions shifting between amusement and boredom. The leader, a boy with shaggy blonde hair, took a step forward, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "I thought rats only came out at night," he mused, tilting his head. Milo let out a low growl, stepping in front of Caroline, his small frame tense. Blonde boy smirked. "Oh, scary." One of the other boys laughed. "Careful, that thing might bite." Milo's growl deepened. Caroline swallowed hard. She knew better than to argue, but she also knew she wasn't going to run. Not with Milo standing in front of her like that. Blonde boy crouched slightly, eyeing the dog. "Bet he's not even yours," he said. "Bet he's just a stray you picked up." Caroline lifted her chin. "Doesn't matter," she said quietly. "He's mine now." For a second, the boy seemed to consider that. Then he rolled his eyes. "Whatever." He straightened up, giving a careless shrug. "Let's go." And just like that, they lost interest. As their footsteps faded, Caroline let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Milo turned to her, ears twitching, his eyes bright and alert. She ran a hand over his head, her fingers threading through his fur. "At least we have each other," she whispered. Milo licked her hand in response, and for the first time that day, Caroline smiled. The city pulsed with its usual rhythm, cars humming in the distance, the occasional honk cutting through the air, and the scattered footsteps of people too preoccupied to look down at the cracks in the sidewalk. Caroline sat against the faded brick wall of an old building, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the concrete beside her. Milo lay curled up beside her, his small frame rising and falling in steady, measured breaths. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the pavement, warming the cool stone beneath them. Caroline found herself watching people as they passed, the way they hurried, the way their faces flickered with emotion, impatience, distraction, worry. They were all moving towards something, a job, a home, a place where they belonged. She exhaled, resting her chin on her knees. "Wish we had somewhere to go," she murmured, mostly to herself. Milo's ears flicked. He turned his head slightly, looking at her with those dark eyes that had begun to soften over the past few days. When she'd first found him, he had barely moved, barely trusted her touch, but now he rested his head against her knee, his warm breath ghosting over her leg. Caroline smiled faintly, rubbing a hand over his ears. Then, movement caught her eye. Across the street, near a busy corner, a small crowd had gathered. She could hear the faint sound of clapping, the occasional burst of laughter. Curious, she shifted forward, peering through the gaps between people. A street performer stood at the center of it all, a young man juggling bright-colored balls, his movements fluid and effortless. The crowd watched, captivated, their attention hooked by the rhythm of his hands, the way the balls danced through the air. After a particularly skillful trick, a few onlookers tossed coins into a small tin at his feet. The clinking sound carried across the sidewalk, blending with the city's natural symphony. Caroline sat up straighter. Her mind raced. People were paying him, not out of pity, not because he asked, but because he made them stop, because he gave them something to watch. She glanced at Milo, who had also perked up, ears twitching as he took in the noise and movement. A spark flickered in her chest. That night, As they settled into their usual spot, Caroline pulled her hoodie tighter around herself and turned to Milo. "We could do that," she mused, her voice barely above a whisper. Milo, half asleep, let out a small huff. "No, really." She shifted, sitting cross-legged in front of him. "I mean, you already do funny things without trying, and you're cute." She tapped his nose lightly. "People like cute." Milo blinked, unimpressed. Caroline exhaled, thinking. She had no training, no money, no props. Just a dog who, so far, only knew how to eat, sleep, and growl at bullies. But she had time, and she had nothing to lose. The first few days were frustrating. Caroline tried to teach Milo simple tricks, standing on his hind legs, rolling over, jumping through her arms. But the little beagle had a mind of his own. He would attempt a trick halfway, then lose interest, wandering off to sniff something more interesting. She groaned in frustration one afternoon when he flopped onto his side mid-attempt, staring at her like she was the crazy one. "You're supposed to roll over, not take a nap," she muttered, rubbing a hand down her face. Milo wagged his tail, completely unbothered. She leaned back against the wall, letting her head rest against the cool brick. Maybe this was stupid. Maybe she was expecting too much. But then, just as she was about to give up for the day, Milo did something unexpected. He stood up, stretched, and then, completely on his own, rolled over onto his back, his paws flopping in the air. Caroline blinked. Wait, do that again." She leaned forward, excited now, motioning for him to repeat it. Milo stared at her for a moment before, with a slow wag of his tail, rolling over again. Caroline's face broke into a grin. "That's it, buddy." She reached into her pocket, pulling out the last bit of bread she had saved from earlier. She broke it in half, handing him a small piece. "You just bought yourself dinner." Milo chewed happily, tail thumping against the ground. For the first time since she'd started this, something clicked. He was paying attention now, watching her, waiting. Maybe he was learning. The progress was slow, but over the next week, Milo began to change. He stopped resisting when she motioned for him to follow her hand movements. He started anticipating what she wanted, his eyes focused, ears alert. At night, she whispered soft encouragements, her voice the only sound in the quiet alleyway. And Milo, for the first time, responded. Not just with his actions, but with something deeper. Trust. He stopped flinching when she reached out too quickly. He pressed closer to her when they slept. He wagged his tail when she spoke. One night, after he successfully jumped through the loop of her arms for the first time, she collapsed onto the pavement beside him, laughing. "You're gonna be a star, Milo." She scratched behind his ear, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "We're gonna be okay." Milo nuzzled against her hand, his warm breath brushing over her skin. And for the first time in a long time, she truly believed it. The city carried on as usual, people rushing past, the distant hum of traffic, the rhythmic thuds of hurried footsteps on concrete. Caroline sat on a low stone ledge near an old coffee shop, watching the world move. The morning air was crisp, the scent of fresh pastries wafting through the street, mingling with the sharper smell of gasoline and wet pavement. Milo sat beside her, his ears perked up, his nose twitching as if taking in every scent. He was different now, not just the small, frightened thing she had found trembling in the alley. He had changed. She had changed too. For the past week, she had watched the street performers make people stop, smile, and, most importantly, give. She had watched them create something out of nothing, and today she was going to try. But as she stood at the corner of the sidewalk, watching strangers push past, an uneasy feeling twisted in her stomach. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. "Maybe this is a bad idea," she muttered. Milo tilted his head at her, his tail giving a small, encouraging wag. Caroline swallowed hard. She had faced worse things than this. With a deep breath, she took a step forward, pulling Milo gently along. The spot she chose was wide, open enough for people to stop, but not so crowded that they would feel pressured. She set her bag down, adjusting her hoodie, and knelt beside Milo. "Okay, buddy," she whispered, "just like we practiced." Milo sat obediently, watching her with an alert expression. Caroline took a breath, then, hesitating only slightly, raised her hands in the signal they had rehearsed. Milo jumped up onto his hind legs. For a moment, nothing happened. People walked by, barely glancing in their direction. Caroline's pulse quickened. Maybe she had been wrong. Maybe no one would care. But then, Milo did something unexpected. As if sensing her hesitation, he wagged his tail, dropped onto all fours, then gave an exaggerated bow. His front paws stretched out, his ears flopping forward. A small giggle rang out. Caroline turned just in time to see a little girl tugging at her mother's coat, pointing. "Mommy, look!" The mother, distracted, barely glanced down until Milo did it again. This time, he added a playful bark. The little girl clapped. And just like that, the first coin hit the pavement. Caroline barely processed it. One moment, they had been invisible. The next, someone had stopped. Then another. An older man in a suit paused, just long enough to watch. A group of teenagers snickered, but lingered. A woman carrying a grocery bag slowed her pace. Caroline felt something tighten in her throat. She lifted her hands again. Milo stood on two legs, held the position, then, on her next cue, rolled over. A few more people stopped. A second coin landed. Caroline forced herself to breathe. She motioned for Milo to jump, and he did, leaping through the space between her arms. This time, someone clapped. Caroline's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the coins, feeling their weight in her palm. It wasn't much, but it was something. And something was everything. By the time the crowd had thinned and the sun had shifted higher, Caroline sat cross-legged on the pavement, counting what they had earned. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than she had expected. Milo plopped down beside her, his tail thumping lazily against the ground. Caroline reached into her pocket, running her fingers over the small collection of coins. With a slow breath, she stood, tucking the money safely away. She knew exactly what she was going to do. The small sandwich shop on the corner smelled like toasted bread and melted cheese. Caroline hesitated before stepping inside, her presence earning a few wary glances from the cashier. She ignored them. Walking up to the counter, she pressed the coins down onto the surface. "One sandwich," she said, her voice firm. The cashier eyed her, then the money, then sighed before grabbing a piece of bread. A few minutes later, Caroline walked out holding the warm sandwich in her hands. She sat on the curb, unwrapped the bread, and without hesitation, tore it in half. She handed the bigger piece to Milo. "We did it, Milo," she whispered. The little dog wagged his tail before eagerly taking a bite. And after a long time, Caroline felt full. The mornings were beginning to feel familiar, the cold air pressing against her skin, the distant chatter of early commuters, the sound of shoes tapping against the pavement as people hurried past. Caroline had started recognizing faces: the old man with the battered hat who sat near the newspaper stand, the woman with the green scarf who always carried a small shopping bag, and the street vendor who set up his fruit stand before the sun fully crested the buildings. And surprisingly, some of them had started recognizing her too. She and Milo had become a part of the city's rhythm. "Look, Mommy, it's the little dog again." Caroline glanced up at the excited voice. her fingers tightening slightly around the strap of her bag. A little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing eagerly in her direction. The woman, who had passed by just yesterday, hesitated. Milo, as if sensing the attention, wagged his tail. Then, without any prompting, he sat up on his hind legs, his ears flopping slightly as he balanced. The little girl clapped, giggling. The mother smiled, and a moment later, a coin landed in Caroline's cup. "Good boy," Caroline murmured under her breath, reaching down to rub Milo's head as the mother and daughter continued on their way. A familiar warmth bloomed in her chest. They were doing it. Each day, their performances became smoother, their movements more in sync. Caroline learned that people liked things that felt natural, playful. So she let Milo take the lead sometimes. When he playfully chased his tail, the crowd chuckled. When he barked happily after a trick, people clapped. And when he, entirely on his own, ran in excited circles before flopping onto his back dramatically, Caroline realized something important. People didn't just watch tricks, they watched personalities, and Milo had more of it than anyone she had ever met. One afternoon, as she set up in their usual spot, she felt a strange sensation, like she was being watched. Turning her head slightly, her eyes landed on a group of familiar faces. The boys, the ones who had cornered her before, who had called her names, mocked her, tried to take what little she had. They weren't laughing this time. They stood a few feet away, watching. Their expressions unreadable. Caroline stiffened instinctively, her heart thumping against her ribs. Milo noticed too. His ears twitched, but he didn't growl. He just stared back at them, as if waiting for them to make the first move. One of the boys, blonde boy, shoved his hands into his pockets and stepped forward. "You really got him doing all that circus stuff?" His voice was quieter than before, lacking the usual cruelty. Caroline didn't answer immediately. Instead, she met his gaze and then, slowly, gave Milo the signal to roll over. The little dog did it perfectly. One of the other boys whistled under his breath. Blonde boy let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "Huh," he muttered, as if he wasn't sure what to think. Then, without another word, he turned and walked off. The others followed. Caroline exhaled, barely realizing she had been holding her breath. Milo nudged her knee with his nose. She scratched behind his ears, absent-mindedly. Maybe people could change. That evening, as the crowd began to thin and the sky shifted into warm shades of orange and pink, Caroline gathered their earnings. It had been a good day. As she tucked the coins into her pocket, she felt a presence beside her. She looked up. The fruit vendor, the one she passed every morning but never spoke to, stood near his stand, watching her with a knowing expression. Without a word, he reached into his crate, pulled out a ripe red apple, and extended it toward her. "For the little performer," he said simply. Caroline hesitated. Then, carefully, she reached out and took it. The vendor gave her a small nod before turning back to his work. She stared down at the apple in her hands, something tight forming in her chest. She wasn't sure what it was. Gratitude, maybe. Or maybe just the strange, unfamiliar feeling of being seen. Later, as she sat on the curb beside Milo, she took a slow bite of the apple, savoring its sweetness. Milo rested his head against her knee, eyes drifting shut. She glanced down at him, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Guess we're not invisible anymore," she murmured. The sleek black car moved steadily through the city, its engine humming softly beneath the chatter of passing pedestrians and the occasional honk from impatient drivers. Inside, Justin slumped against the leather seat, arms crossed, his gaze drifting lazily over the view outside. It was another day, another car ride with his mother, another silent journey through streets that meant nothing to him. His mother, Helena, sat in the front passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, her perfectly manicured fingers gliding over the screen as she read through whatever business emails demanded her attention today. Her presence was composed as always, shoulders squared, posture straight, her sharp eyes scanning figures and reports without so much as a pause. Justin sighed. It had been like this since his father passed. Before, his mother had been different. She had smiled more, talked more. His father had been the one steering the company, leaving Helena time to focus on him. But after he was gone, everything shifted. Now, her world revolved around business meetings and long hours at the office. And Justin had been left to adjust on his own. And he hated it. Outside, the city blurred past. Tall buildings, flashing billboards, people moving in endless streams. Nothing interesting, nothing worth watching. Then, something caught his eye. A gathering of people. At first, he didn't think much of it. New York was full of random street performances, musicians, magicians, people balancing on stilts for a few dollars. But something about this crowd felt different. His eyes narrowed as he sat up slightly, pressing his forehead against the cool glass of the window. In the center of the circle, a girl knelt beside a small dog, a scrappy-looking beagle with floppy ears and a wagging tail. Justin's breath caught in his throat. Number it couldn't be. But then, the dog lifted his head, and in that instant, everything else faded. The people, the noise, the city itself. Justin's heart pounded as he scrambled forward, nearly pressing his face to the window. His pulse drummed in his ears. "Stop the car!" His voice came out sharper than intended, startling Helena from her phone. She frowned, turning in her seat. "What?" "Stop the car!" he repeated, urgency thick in his tone. The driver hesitated, but slowed as Helena lifted a hand. "Justin, what is it?" But Justin wasn't listening. He fumbled with the door handle even before the car came to a full stop, shoving it open and stepping onto the sidewalk. His eyes locked on the dog. His dog. Jun. The name tore from his throat before he could stop himself. Everything stilled. The girl, the one with tangled brown hair and wary eyes, froze mid-motion. The dog stiffened, and then, as if something had snapped into place, the beagle's ears perked, his head whipping toward the sound of Justin's voice. There was a split second of stillness. Then, the dog bolted. Justin barely had time to react before Jun, Milo, was racing toward him, tail wagging so hard his entire body wobbled. Justin dropped to his knees, arms outstretched. The impact of the small body hitting his chest nearly knocked him backward. But he didn't care. Warm fur, familiar weight, the sound of excited whines and frantic licking against his face. Justin squeezed his eyes shut. It was him. Jun. His voice broke slightly as he buried his fingers in the beagle's fur, feeling the rapid thump of his heartbeat against his palm. For a moment, he forgot everything. His mother, the car, the staring crowd. But then, a voice shattered the moment. "Hey!" Justin lifted his head, startled. The girl was still frozen in place, eyes wide, disbelief written across her face. But there was something else there, too. Something sharp. Something that made Justin's stomach twist. Because as he clutched the dog tighter, he suddenly realized the girl wasn't looking at him like someone who had stolen something. She was looking at him like someone who was about to lose everything. Leave a comment. Rain. If you feel poor Caroline is about to experience another sadness. Justin's grip on Jun tightened as he stood, his heart still hammering from the shock. He barely noticed the people still watching, their murmurs fading into the background. His focus was entirely on the girl in front of him, the one with tangled hair and wide, unreadable eyes. She took a hesitant step forward. "Wait," she started, voice uncertain, like she wasn't sure what words to use. Justin's expression darkened. "Thief! You stole him!" he snapped. Caroline flinched. "What? You—" His voice wavered with emotion, but he pushed through it. "You took my dog. You made him do tricks for money." The words felt wrong even as they left his mouth, but he couldn't stop them. Anger and relief tangled inside him, the emotions so tightly wound that he didn't know what to do except lash out. Caroline's mouth opened, then shut. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides. No, I didn't." People were starting to watch. The lingering crowd, those who had just moments ago been entertained by Milo's tricks, now whispered among themselves. "A thief," someone murmured. "I knew it," another voice sneered. "Street kids will take anything that's not nailed down." She probably saw a rich family's dog and thought she could get away with it. The words sank into Caroline's skin like thorns. "I didn't steal him," she said again, her voice thinner now, forced through the tightness in her throat. Justin wasn't listening. He was looking down at Jun, brushing his fingers over the beagle's fur like he was afraid he'd disappear again. "You expect me to believe that?" His voice wavered, but the anger remained. Caroline's jaw clenched. "He was alone," she snapped. "No collar, limping. Her breath hitched. "I thought he was abandoned." Justin let out a sharp breath, disbelief flickering in his expression. "You just thought he didn't belong to anyone?" "Yes. And then you started using him for money." Caroline flinched like she'd been struck. It wasn't like that. A scoff. Right. The whispers around them were growing, folding into something uglier. She probably planned to sell him. A rich kid's dog. She must have thought she hit the jackpot. Caroline felt heat crawl up her neck. It was suffocating. The way people judged so quickly, how they assumed they knew her life. She had learned to ignore it. But then, well, look who finally got caught. A voice from the edge of the crowd sent a chill down Caroline's spine. She turned. The boys, the ones who had taunted her, shoved her, made her life worse whenever they could. They stood near the back, grinning like wolves, smelling blood. "Didn't think you'd aim this high, rat girl," blonde boy sneered. "Stealing from the rich now?" His friends chuckled, nudging each other. Caroline's nails dug into her palms. She could handle their cruelty. She always had. But not here. Not now. Then, suddenly, a sharp, fierce bark split the air. Milo lunged forward, his body taut, his tail stiff. His lips curled slightly, and for the first time, his small frame held something solid, protective. The crowd stilled. The boys froze. Justin's breath caught. Milo had been gentle, playful, a little mischievous. But now he was defending her. Helena, who had been silent until this moment, took a slow step forward, her gaze shifting between Milo and Caroline. Justin's grip on his dog loosened, because dogs didn't protect people they feared. They protected people they loved. And Milo, June, was standing in front of Caroline, fiercely, loyally, protectively. The boys shuffled back, eyes darting between them. Blonde boy scoffed, muttering, "Tsh, whatever." Then he turned on his heel, walking off like none of it had mattered. The others followed, their bravado shrinking under the weight of Milo's unwavering stance. Caroline let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Milo let out one more low growl before padding back to her side, pressing his small body against her leg. Helena finally spoke. "That's enough." Justin turned toward her. "Mum." She raised a hand. Not harshly, just firm. "Let's think before we accuse." Justin's stomach twisted. "But she—" "Found him," Helena finished. Her gaze settled on Caroline. "Is that right?" Caroline swallowed. She didn't want to explain this to them, didn't want to beg them to believe her. but Milo's warm fur brushed against her hand, grounding her, so she nodded. I found him in an alley. He was limping, no tags, no collar. Her voice was quieter now. I didn't know he belonged to anyone. Helena studied her, unreadable. Justin's throat felt tight. That doesn't explain the tricks. Caroline exhaled, shoulders sinking slightly. I needed to eat. The words came out flat, honest. And he wanted to help. The weight of it all settled over them. Justin looked down at June. His dog who had been lost, alone, and had found someone to love in his absence. He hated it. He hated how much sense it made, but it still hurt. His fingers curled around June's fur again. We're taking him home. Caroline stiffened, and for the first time, she looked afraid. Helena watched her carefully, then spoke again. I think, she said, we should discuss this somewhere more private. Justin frowned. What? Helena turned toward Caroline. Come with us. Her voice was measured, but not unkind. Let's talk. Caroline hesitated. Justin expected her to refuse, but then she looked at Milo, at the way he still leaned toward her, still trusted her, and slowly, reluctantly, she nodded. The drive was quiet. Justin sat stiffly in the back seat, arms crossed, staring out the window. Milo, lay curled in his lap, but Justin barely noticed the warmth of his fur. His mind was still racing, tangled with emotions too messy to untangle. Caroline sat on the far side, pressed against the door, her fingers twitching slightly against the fabric of her hoodie. She looked like she didn't belong here, because she didn't. The pristine interior of the luxury car, the faint scent of leather and expensive perfume. It was all foreign to someone like her. Helena sat in the front, poised as ever, though her gaze flicked toward the rearview mirror every so often. She was studying Caroline, assessing her the way she assessed business deals and market trends. Justin huffed, shifting in his seat. This is pointless, he muttered. Helena ignored him. We'll talk at home. Caroline's fingers tightened against her sleeves. Why? Because I'd rather not have this conversation in the middle of the street, Helena replied smoothly. And because, if I understand correctly, you haven't had a proper meal in a while. Caroline's lips parted slightly, as if the thought hadn't even occurred to her. Justin scoffed. You think one meal fixes everything? Helena shot him a look, number. But I think it's a start. Justin clenched his jaw and looked back out the window. Milo shifted, resting his head against his arm, his tail wagging slightly. Justin sighed. Traitor, he muttered. Milo wagged harder. The mansion loomed ahead, bathed in the golden glow of the evening sun. Caroline hesitated as she stepped out of the car, her sneakers scuffing against the smooth pavement of the driveway. The house, no, the estate, was the kind she'd only ever seen in passing, through bus windows or newspaper clippings. Wide, sprawling, with tall glass windows and a manicured lawn that stretched farther than she could comprehend. She didn't belong here. She shouldn't be here. Milo trotted up beside her, brushing against her leg like he could sense her nerves. Justin didn't say anything as he stepped ahead, pushing the front door open. Helena motioned for Caroline to follow. Inside, the house was impossibly big, the kind of space that swallowed sound and felt too clean to touch. Caroline shifted awkwardly near the entrance, unsure of whether she was supposed to take off her shoes, whether she was allowed to breathe in a place like this. Justin rolled his eyes and walked off, mumbling something under his breath. Helena sighed. Come, she said simply, leading the way. Caroline hesitated, then followed. Dinner was quiet. Caroline sat at the far end of a long, polished table, the space between her and the others feeling vast, like an unspoken barrier. A plate of food sat in front of her. More food than she'd seen in a single meal in years. She stared at it, unsure. "Eat," Helena said gently. Caroline looked up, wary. "Consider it repayment," Helena continued, "for taking care of Jun." Caroline hesitated for a second longer before picking up the fork. The food was warm, real, nothing like the stale bread and scraps she was used to. She ate slowly, carefully, as if it might disappear if she moved too fast. Helena waited until she'd taken a few bites before speaking. "When did you find him?" Caroline swallowed. 8 months ago. Helena leaned back slightly. "We lost him at the airport a year ago. His crate door came loose, and before we knew it, he was gone." Justin looked up, his expression tight. "We searched for weeks," he muttered, "had posters everywhere. We even hired people to look for him." Caroline's grip on her fork tightened. "I never saw any posters." Justin's eyes narrowed. "Maybe because you weren't looking." "Maybe," she admitted. Then, more softly, "Or maybe he'd already gone too far." Silence stretched between them. Caroline set down her fork. "Do I have to give him back?" Her voice was quiet, but the weight of the question hung heavily in the air. Justin stiffened. Helena studied her, her sharp gaze softer than before. "Do you want to?" Caroline inhaled sharply, her fingers curling into the fabric of her hoodie. "I just..." Her voice wavered. "I just wanted him to be safe." Justin swallowed, looking down at Milo, who was resting peacefully beside Caroline's chair, his small body curled comfortably at her feet. Milo had found a home with her. Justin hated how much that hurt. Helena exhaled slowly. "How about this?" she said, folding her hands together. "Stay the night. Let's talk more in the morning." Caroline blinked. "What?" Justin frowned. "Mum, you have nowhere else to go, do you?" Helena asked simply. Caroline stiffened. Helena's gaze was unwavering, but not unkind. "Then stay. Just for tonight." Caroline swallowed hard. She should say no. She should leave. But Milo was still curled against her, comfortable, safe. And for the first time in a long time, she felt warm. So hesitantly, she nodded. Just for tonight. The bed was too soft. Caroline lay on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling, her body stiff against the plush mattress. The room was dark, save for the soft glow from the hallway seeping through the door. She could hear the faint hum of the house, distant footsteps, the occasional creak of the wall settling, the muffled sound of the wind against the windows. It was too quiet, too still. She turned onto her side, curling into herself. The blanket smelled clean, fresh, like detergent and warmth. Not like the damp fabric of her hoodie, not like the city air thick with exhaust and smoke. It should have been comforting, but it wasn't. Her fingers gripped the edge of the pillow. Helena had been kind in her own way. Not warm, not soft, but not cruel. There was calculation behind her words, but not malice. And Justin... She exhaled sharply. Justin didn't want her here. That much was obvious. He barely spoke to her during dinner, barely looked at her, except when he glanced at Milo, his expression unreadable. Milo. He lay beside the bed, nestled into the rug, his body rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. He had settled into the house like he belonged there, like he remembered. Caroline bit the inside of her cheek. Maybe he did. Maybe she was the one who didn't belong. The morning came too quickly. Caroline woke before the sun fully rose, the room bathed in pale blue light. She sat up slowly, rubbing at her tired eyes. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then, the weight of the bed beneath her reminded her. She glanced down. Milo was still asleep, his tiny body curled into a tight ball. She hesitated, then reached down, her fingers running gently over his fur. His ears twitched, but he didn't wake. A lump formed in her throat. "Live well, my little friend," she whispered. "I have to go." She wasn't sure why she said it out loud. Maybe to convince herself. Maybe to let him know. Maybe to make it real. Justin hadn't slept well. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the fact that his dog, his best friend, had spent the night curled up with someone else. Or maybe it was the unease that gnawed at him, an uncomfortable thought he didn't want to acknowledge. Either way, he had woken up early, restless and irritated. Which was why, when he stepped out of his room and started down the hallway, he saw her. Caroline. She was standing at the edge of the bed, her fingers gently brushing through Milo's fur, her face tight with something he couldn't quite place. Then she whispered something, too soft for him to hear. And the way she looked at Milo, it wasn't possession, it wasn't desperation, it was love. Justin felt something shift inside him. She wasn't trying to steal him, she was saying goodbye. He took a step back, heart pounding, his mind racing. Milo was her family, just as much as he was his. Caroline swung her legs over the side of the bed, standing slowly. The hardwood floor was cool against her bare feet. She moved carefully, quietly. She didn't have much, just her hoodie, her bag, the few coins she had left. She had slipped back into her worn-out sneakers before she even realized she was doing it. She had always known this would happen. She had always known he would go back to them. She just didn't think it would hurt this much. She reached for the doorknob. "You're leaving?" Her breath caught. She turned, her heart stuttering in her chest. Justin stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, arms crossed. His hair was messy, his expression unreadable, his voice low from sleep. Caroline swallowed. She licked her lips, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I should go." Justin didn't reply right away. His eyes flicked to Milo, then back to her. "You love him," he said. It wasn't a question. Caroline's fingers curled into fists. "Of course I do," she murmured. Justin exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "He loves you too." Caroline looked down. "That's why I have to go." Justin frowned. "That makes no sense." Caroline clenched her jaw. "He belongs here." Silence stretched between them. Then, to her surprise, Justin turned on his heel and walked away. She blinked. That was it. No more accusations. No yelling. She let out a breath, shaking her head. She turned back to the door. "Caroline." Her head snapped up. Justin was halfway down the hall, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet house. "Wait here." Then, he disappeared around the corner. Helena was already in the kitchen when Justin found her. She stood by the window, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, her expression distant. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. Justin didn't answer right away. He crossed his arms, hesitating. Then, in a voice that was quieter than he expected, he asked, "Can she stay?" Helena blinked, turning to him. "Excuse me." He shifted, crossing his arms. "Caroline." He swallowed, forcing himself to say it. "Can she stay here?" Helena set her cup down. "Justin." "The West Wing is empty," he added quickly, "and Jun doesn't want to be away from her." Helena studied him. Justin shifted under her gaze. "You hated her yesterday," she said finally. Justin clenched his jaw. "I was wrong." Something flickered in Helena's expression. Justin exhaled sharply. "Look, I know it's weird, okay? But she didn't take him. And she didn't just use him either. He's hers, as much as he's mine." His voice dropped slightly. "I get it now." Helena was silent for a long time. Then, finally, she nodded. Justin blinked. "Wait, really?" Helena picked up her coffee again. Go ask her. Caroline sat on the edge of the bed, Milo resting his head on her lap. The door creaked open. Justin leaned against the frame, watching her. Mum said you can stay. Caroline's fingers froze against Milo's fur. She lifted her head slowly. What? Justin shrugged. You heard me. Caroline stared at him. Why? Justin sighed. Because Milo loves you. His voice softened slightly. And I think maybe you deserve to have somewhere to stay for once. Caroline's throat felt tight. She glanced down at Milo, who wagged his tail against her leg. She inhaled sharply, then looked back at Justin. Caroline hesitated. The words felt too big, too much, pressing against her ribs like she couldn't breathe. Stay. She'd never been given a choice before. Never had a place to stay that wasn't temporary, that wasn't something she had to fight for. Justin shifted, crossing his arms. Look, if you don't want to, whatever. His voice was casual, but there was something else beneath it. But June, Milo, he doesn't want you to go. Caroline glanced down. Milo was still nestled against her, tail thumping softly against the bedspread. His eyes, warm and trusting, gazed up at her as if waiting for her answer. A lump formed in her throat. She wanted to stay. She wanted to wake up with Milo beside her, wanted to feel safe, wanted to know what it was like to live inside four walls without worrying about where her next meal would come from. But wanting had never gotten her anything before. She took a shaky breath. I don't... Her voice cracked, so she swallowed and tried again. I don't know how to do this. Justin frowned. Do what? She gestured vaguely to the room, the house, everything. This, be here, be... She hesitated. Be someone who belongs. Justin didn't speak for a moment. Then he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Well, you're already here, and I guess that's a start. Caroline blinked. He was trying. He didn't have to, but he was. She exhaled slowly, looking down at Milo, then back up at Justin. And finally, she nodded. Breakfast was awkward. Caroline couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. Even as she stood in the grand dining room, surrounded by polished silverware and expensive china, she felt like an imposter in someone else's world. The mansion was everything she wasn't. Clean, structured, permanent. And she had never had permanence. She glanced down at her hoodie. The fabric stretched thin from wear. She had thought about changing into something else, but all she had were the clothes on her back. The thought made her shift uncomfortably in her seat. Milo sat at her feet, resting his head against her leg, tail thumping lazily. He was at ease, completely unaware of the invisible wall Caroline felt between her and the life unfolding around her. You're holding the fork wrong, Justin muttered from across the table. Caroline looked up, startled. He gestured with his own fork, exasperated. That's the salad fork. The bigger one is for the main course. Caroline stared at the utensil in her hand. A fork is a fork, she said flatly. Justin groaned, slumping back into his chair. Yeah, tell that to my mother. Helena, who had been quietly sipping her coffee, raised an unimpressed eyebrow. Manners are important. Caroline fought the urge to roll her eyes. She hadn't needed manners to survive out there. Still, she set down the wrong fork and picked up the right one, though it felt ridiculous. Justin smirked. See? You're learning. Caroline glared at him, but said nothing, focusing on the plate of food in front of her. Eggs, toast, fresh fruit, a glass of orange juice. More food than she'd had in days. She took a small bite, chewing slowly, half expecting someone to snatch the plate away before she could finish. But no one did. Helena was watching her, though, not with suspicion, but with quiet calculation. Caroline swallowed, setting her fork down. "Why are you letting me stay?" Helena took her time answering. "Because I see potential in you." Caroline frowned. "Potential for what?" "To have a better life." The words sat heavy in the air between them. Caroline hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Justin, surprisingly, was the one who spoke next. "She's going to make you go to school, you know." Caroline nearly choked on her juice. "What?" Helena leaned back in her chair. "If you're going to stay here, you need an education." Caroline clenched her hands into fists. I don't go to school. You will now." Helena's voice was calm, but firm. "You're smart, Caroline. You deserve more than just surviving." Caroline looked down, gripping the edge of the table. Deserving had never been part of her life. She had learned not to expect anything from anyone. But Helena wasn't just giving her something, she was offering a chance. She swallowed hard, glancing at Milo, who nudged her hand with his nose. "Okay," she whispered. Helena gave a small nod, as if she had already known the answer. Justin, however, didn't seem as sure. He eyed Caroline warily, like he was still trying to figure out where she fit into his world. She wasn't sure either. Later that afternoon, Justin found Caroline outside. She was sitting on the grass, tossing a small ball for Milo, who chased after it with endless enthusiasm. The mansion's backyard stretched far beyond what Caroline could comprehend. Perfectly trimmed hedges, stone pathways, a fountain in the distance. It felt unreal. Justin stood nearby, hands in his pockets, watching her. She didn't acknowledge him at first, too focused on the dog bounding across the yard. Finally, he sat down a few feet away, arms resting on his knees. "You don't talk much," he muttered. Caroline shrugged. Never had anyone to talk to. Justin glanced at her, then at Milo, who was now rolling in the grass like a fool. "You really love him, huh?" Caroline didn't hesitate. "Yeah." Justin was quiet for a moment. Then, to her surprise, he sighed. "My dad got him for me," he admitted, voice quieter than before. "Before he died." Caroline blinked, caught off guard. "He said every kid needed a best friend." Justin scratched at the grass. "I thought he was just talking about people. But he was right." Caroline looked at him then. Really looked at him. For the first time, she saw the grief hidden beneath his stubbornness. The loss that sat in his chest like a weight too heavy to lift. She had always assumed he was just some spoiled rich kid who had everything. But he had lost things too. Slowly, she said, "Milo's a good friend." Justin exhaled a laugh. "Yeah, he is." Milo trotted over, dropping the ball between them before flopping dramatically onto his back. Caroline reached out to rub his belly, and after a brief moment of hesitation, Justin did the same. The tension between them eased, just slightly, and for the first time, Caroline didn't feel so much like an outsider. That evening, Helena called them both into the sitting room. Caroline stood near the doorway, shifting on her feet, while Justin lounged on the couch, feet propped up on the armrest. Helena folded her hands in her lap. "I've made a decision," she said. Caroline tensed. "As Justin told you, you can stay, Caroline," she continued, her gaze steady. "But I, as the host, clearly confirm with you. Not just for a few nights. Not just as a guest." Caroline's breath hitched. "If you want it," Helena said, "this can be your home." The words were so unexpected, so unreal, that Caroline thought she had misheard. She looked at Justin, expecting to see resistance, but he just shrugged. The West Wing's empty. Caroline's throat felt tight. Helena wasn't offering charity. She wasn't offering pity. She was offering family. And for the first time in her life, Caroline thought maybe just maybe, she could say yes. The weekend air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh grass and earth as Helena, Justin, and Caroline strolled through the park. The sun stretched golden fingers across the open field, warming the skin despite the gentle breeze. Milo tore across the grass, ears flapping as he chased after a stick Justin had thrown. His barks rang through the air, sharp and joyous, drawing laughter from a few nearby families. Caroline watched, her hands tucked into the sleeves of a borrowed sweater. The sensation of warmth, of safety, was still new to her. She wasn't used to walking alongside people who expected nothing from her, who wanted her there. Helena walked a few steps ahead, her expression unreadable, though every so often, her gaze flickered toward Caroline and Justin. Justin jogged toward Milo, scooping the beagle up and spinning him once before setting him back down. When he returned, he plopped onto the grass beside Caroline, breathing heavily. "You're slow," Caroline muttered. Justin rolled his eyes. "You try running in these shoes." He wiggled his expensive sneakers. "I'm not about to ruin them." Caroline huffed out a laugh. "Sounds like an excuse." Justin nudged her shoulder with his. "Sounds like you're getting a little too comfortable here." Caroline hesitated, shifting slightly. Maybe she was, and for the first time, that idea didn't scare her. The following weekend, Helena took them somewhere different. The animal shelter smelled of disinfectant and damp fur, but Caroline didn't mind. She followed Justin down a row of kennels, peering through the bars at the dogs inside. Some wagged their tails eagerly, others stayed curled in their corners, their eyes weary, waiting. "They all look—" Caroline trailed off. Justin finished for her. "Like they need someone." She nodded. Justin knelt beside one of the cages, sticking his fingers through the bars. A small, wiry terrier crept forward, sniffing cautiously before giving his hand a tentative lick. Caroline watched as Justin's expression softened. He hadn't always been this way. Gentle, patient. The boy she had met weeks ago had been guarded, possessive, unwilling to share. But now he was different. She saw it in the way he scratched behind the terrier's ears, the way his voice lowered when he murmured reassurances to the frightened dog. He was learning that sharing didn't mean losing, and neither was she. Milo nudged Caroline's leg, tail wagging, as if urging her to see what she already knew. They had both found something here, not just a house, a home. That evening, Caroline sat with Justin on the front steps of the mansion, watching as Milo chased fireflies across the yard. The warm glow of the estate lights bathed the world in soft golden hues, making everything feel still, peaceful. Justin exhaled, leaning back on his elbows. "You're really staying, huh?" Caroline glanced at him. She'd asked herself that question 1,000 times. At first, she had thought she was borrowing time, existing in a space that didn't belong to her. But now she wasn't so sure. She looked at Milo, at Justin, at the house that no longer felt like a stranger's place. And finally, she let herself believe it. She let herself want it. "Yeah," she said softly. Justin didn't tease her for it. Instead, he just nodded. "Good." From the balcony above, Helena watched them, two children who had started as strangers, now laughing, now sharing space without hesitation. She had seen the shift in Justin, the way his edges had softened, the way his walls had lowered just enough to let someone else in. And Caroline, skeptical, hesitant Caroline, had begun to trust. Helena sipped her wine, letting out a slow breath. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected Caroline to slip into their lives so effortlessly, hadn't expected her own son to grow from the experience, hadn't expected herself to feel so certain about this decision. Helena set her glass down. She glanced down at the two figures below, watching as Justin tossed a stick for Milo, and Caroline playfully shoved him when he missed. She smiled to herself, and in a rare moment of warmth whispered, "Welcome home." If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. And if you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends on WhatsApp. And now, share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections full of deep values yet entertaining. See you there.